everyone. Welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Jim Powell, Editorial Director for TDWI, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about data-driven decisions, how B2B data can help transform your business. Our sponsor is ZoomInfo. For our presentations today, we'll first hear from Fern Halper with TDWI. After Fern speaks, we'll be joined by Amit Zai with ZoomInfo and Andy Ruffles with Capital One for a panel discussion. Okay, again today we're going to be talking about data-driven decisions, how B2B data can help transform your business. Our first speaker is Fern Halper, Vice President and Senior Director of TDWI Research for Advanced Analytics. She's well known in the analytics community, having been published hundreds of times on data mining and information technology over the past 20 years. Fern is also co-author of several Dummies books on cloud computing and big data. She focuses on advanced analytics, including predictive analytics, machine learning, AI, cognitive computing, and big data analytics approaches. She's been a partner at industry analyst firm Hurwitz and Associates and a lead data analyst for Bell Labs. She's taught at both Colgate University and Bentley University. Her PhD is from Texas A&M University. Fern, I'll turn things over to you now.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on how B2B data can help to transform your business. So I'm going to kick things off. I'm going to talk about how companies are leveraging third-party data today for value across the company, and specifically B2B firmographic data. I'll also talk about the importance of data enrichment in analytics. And then we'll get started on the panel. We'll hear from Andy from Capital One about the Capital One journey with B2B data. And then we'll open it up for a wider panel discussion with Amit from ZoomInfo to discuss some of the other B2B and some other B2B and platform topics. And also be thinking about your questions, because as Jim mentioned, we're going to leave plenty of time for audience Q&A at the end of the panel. So what we're seeing at TDWI is that companies are collecting a range of data types. And so this chart comes from a recent survey on data and analytics, and we run this data and analytics survey yearly. And so in it, we ask, what kinds of data is your company using for analytics now and planning to use? So you can see the blue is using now, the orange is planning to use, and then the gray is no plans or don't know. And you can look down the y-axis on this chart and see that we've listed all kinds of data. And you can see that all kinds of data are being used for analytics. This includes structured data, which is obviously at the top of the chart there, along with transactional data. But there's also log data, demographic data, which we'll talk about, external and internal text data, and machine-generated data, and so on. And you could see as you look on this chart that organizations are already collecting a lot of diverse data for analytics, in the blue there. So for instance, you look at things like external text data that's being used by, already almost 40% of the respondents to this survey. And if you look at the orange, they're planning to collect more and use it more for analytics. And that's the case sort of across the board with all of these data types. And then if we look at demographic data, you could see that close to 50% are collecting it and using it for analytics now, and that another 35% are also planning to use it. I'll also mention that I've seen that number higher in other surveys. So this demographic data here, it includes B2C data, data about customers and their consumers and their zip codes and how much they earn and how big their families are and, educational attainment, and so on. But it also includes the B2B or the firmographic type of data. So what's firmographic data? Firmographic data is data about companies. It includes information such as industry, revenue, locations, the structure of some of companies, because obviously companies can have things like subsidiaries, as well as spend information. It may include other kinds of information like contact information of people at these various companies. And what's it used for? Well, it's used for a number of different things. Some organizations use it for lead generation, for example, in sales, or they may use it also for help in marketing. So for example, it might be used for sales prospecting. So in that case, it could be used to identify potential sales leads that may be interested in an organization's products or services. And that can be used to build a list of potential customers that then sales representatives can reach out to and start building relationships with. Or it can be used for lead scoring, where it can be assigned a score. And so you're assigning a score to potential sales leads that might be based on various criteria, like their level of engagement with the organization's marketing materials, website, their demographics, their behavior patterns. And B2B data can also be used as part of an enriched data set for analytics, which is the second bullet I have here. So the idea there is that the organization is going to marry together their own data, their first party data that they collect with, other data. So they want to enrich their data set for analytics and applications. And I've listed some examples here. So for instance, you might take B2B data and marry it with billing data to better understand customer retention. And I'll show you a simple example of that in a second. Or you could take industry data and other data together for sales planning, or you could look at buyer intent data and use that for sales planning. So let's look at an example here. So let's say you're a telco and you're concerned that your business clients are leaving your service. So you maybe have an 800 service or something, and they're leaving the service. So you decide that you're going to build a machine learning model that predicts whether a company is going to churn or not. And you start to collect data with known outcomes, which is what you would do to build a machine learning model. And you could see that under the churn column, which is the last column on the right. And 0 is no churn and 1 is churn in this case. So this is a simple example, but here I'm showing that you're bringing the data that you have together. And that might include things like monthly spend. We have the company ID, we have monthly spend, the length of time, and in this case, in years, that a company is your customer, the size of the company, say in terms of number of employees, as well as some of this firmographic data, let's say industry. So you could see that the monthly spend is about the same, and in these 5 simple examples here, and the length of time the customer is about the same, but perhaps companies in a certain industry of a certain size are more likely to churn. So you see the industry SIC code, and you see that that size may be smaller and it has a 1 there. So of course this is a really tiny amount of data, but the point is that you could add more firmographic attributes, plus imagine that you had tens of thousands of rows of data. It's not going to be easy to spot a trend in that pattern. But with more enriched data, you're going to get a more accurate model. So in other words, you're going to be able to identify more accurate patterns. Maybe a company, for example, has an 80% probability of churn if they're a certain size in a certain industry, with certain other attributes. Again, this is a very simple example, but you get the idea that, by marrying your data with third-party data, you can actually enrich a data set for analysis. Okay, so I gave you 2 use cases, the leads as well as the analysis. And then, so you might be saying, where can I get this information? And you could buy the information from a firmographic provider such as ZoomInfo, who's on the call today, and they provide business information and data on companies worldwide. That includes, financial data and industry data, as well as what I was talking about, the corporate hierarchy information. And, you can also get this kind of data from cloud marketplaces. And these are online marketplaces for buyers and sellers. So for example, ZoomInfo might also be on the marketplace that your cloud service provider offers, so maybe you're on AWS or Snowflake, they have these marketplaces that the B2B providers participate in. And, they will sell that same kind of data on the marketplace. And there might also be other kinds of useful data on that marketplace, such as industry-specific data too. And, I will say that I haven't seen very many free data sources for firmographic information in the way that would be useful. Obviously you see it for B2C data, but I haven't seen it so much on the B2B side, so I didn't put any open source type of sources there. It's also, I think it's important to note that many B2B providers just don't offer data. They also offer analytics tools to analyze interactions and conversations, and provide other services. So before we get into the case study, I wanted to point out some challenges that organizations can face with firmographic data. And the first one is whether it's accurate, fresh, and has high quality. So you can certainly purchase out-of-date data, and B2B data can be difficult to maintain and keep up to date. And we'll talk about that in the panel. Contact information can change frequently. Contacts move, they change jobs, they switch companies. That can make it difficult to keep up with the changes. Second, there may not be the correct representation of the company and its subsidiaries. So companies can merge, they can change names, they can go out of business. Other problems might include things like, match rates. And of course, integrating it for data enrichment can also be an issue. So as I mentioned, the B2B data can come from a variety of sources. I mean, you might have your customer relationship management systems or your marketing automation platforms, and then you're bringing in third-party data. So you want to be able to integrate this data into a cohesive data set, and but you're dealing with data that may have disparate data formats and structures. So we'll talk about that on the panel also. So those are some of the challenges. So what I want to do is I want to turn it back over to Jim to introduce our Capital One and Zoom Info speakers, and then we're actually going to ask you a poll question, and we'll get to the case study. And so Jim, back over to you to introduce Andy and Amit.
Thank you, Fern. Just a quick reminder to our audience, if you have a question, you can enter it at any time in the Ask a Question window. We'll be answering audience questions in the final portion of our program. So joining Fern now in our roundtable is Amit Rai with Zoom Info. Amit is a visionary and entrepreneurial leader, leveraging successful startup and turnaround experience with product management, engineering, and go-to-market expertise to scale companies for growth and profitability. He has been working at the forefront of artificial intelligence software technology and is known for pioneering groundbreaking products from concept to hundreds of millions of dollars. He is skilled at the evangelizing vision to internal and external stakeholders, M&A, and building and developing high-performance teams. We're also joined by Andy Ruffles with Capital One. Andy is a director leading sales enablement for the middle market sales teams within Capital One's commercial banking business. Andy's focus is on finding the right balance of data, routine, and technology to help the sales organization maximize efficiency and increase productivity. Andy has spent the last 7 years supporting teams at Capital One, and before that he had spent several years supporting commercial teams within GE Capital's middle market banking group. Welcome, Amit and Andy. Fern, I'll turn things back over to you for our panel discussion.
Okay, great. Yeah, welcome to both of you. And before we kick things off on the panel, I'm going to just ask you a poll question to see where you stand on some things. So the question is this: which statements apply to your company? So you can select as many as apply. So you can see that there's a list of 5 here. The first one is, do you have a master data team that focuses on revenue? Then the second one is, our sales and marketing team have access to B2B data. We have data accuracy challenges. So if you have data accuracy challenges, select that. If you have a sales and marketing team that have access to B2B data, then select that. We have a multi-vendor strategy, for data, or our data analytics team is using third-party data providers. So I see the answers coming in. And so we'll give you, say, let's give you another 30 seconds and see where you're at in terms of data and third-party data and data accuracy. And I won't make any predictions here in terms of what we're looking at.
Andy or Amit, would you like to venture a guess and make a prediction of what's going to be the most popular answer?
Well, I answered it, Jim, and I clicked every one of these for me, for Capital One. So we definitely have a lot of skin in a lot of these games here. So that was my response. I would imagine it's probably similar for a lot of folks too, but I'm curious to see the answer. And by the way, let me just say for the future, Amit, if we're getting introduced, I got to go first because your bio is way better than mine, whoever put that together. I'm not sure anybody ever called me a visionary, so we have to make sure we change this going forward so the audience isn't wildly disappointed when they hear about me.
Feedback taken, Andy. I would concur with Andy that, yeah, I think these are the top challenges, at least I have seen for almost all the Fortune 500 companies. So I would be surprised if I don't see 100%.
Okay, well, the responses are still coming in, so let's just another 10 seconds, and then I'll hit it once, and then I'll hit it again to see if we have any changes. Okay, so let's go for it. Okay, well, data accuracy challenges are an issue. Organizations, so 48% are using third-party data providers already, and our sales and marketing team have access to B2B data. So 44% have access, so the rest don't have access. And yeah, likewise, over 50% aren't necessarily using third-party data yet. So good. So we're glad that you're here. Let me go back. I was just going to see if I could see if there was anything else. No, I guess I can't. Okay. Well, let's get on to the panel discussion. So yeah, so it looks like the right audience is here for sure. And we're going to start with Andy on this, although Amit, after, if you have questions or you want to jump in and add anything while Andy's talking, that's great. And so this question is, Andy, can you tell us about the Capital One journey and how did B2B data help with your digital transformation?
Sure, Fern, and thanks everyone for having me today. So again, just a little more context. So I am in our middle market business within commercial. So my role is in sales operations, and so I support our direct sales team. There's about 150 folks we have in our middle market sales organization across the country with different sales strategies. So for us, I've got businesses that are selling, or relationship, I'll say RMs a lot, that's relationship managers. I have some relationship managers that are selling to big corporate businesses. I have some that are selling to private companies, right? Smaller size companies. So the whole spectrum of trying to help them find the right companies to call on, to prospect. And I think, Fern, you hit a lot of what my focus on is on leveraging the best information for prospecting work. We like to think of the RM has a lot of responsibilities, but ultimately they're trying to bring in companies. So there's that lot of time we spend in the beginning of this funnel, right? The end of the funnel being you have a customer. So our team spends a lot of time trying to find the right companies for them to start that their sales process with. So our journey with ZoomInfo began with a company that ZoomInfo actually bought called Everstring, and worked with them years ago, where we were doing two things. We wanted to provide ability for the RMs, a resource for them to go and just search up information, firmographic company. We gave them a web link in the first thing, and they just would go and they would type in a company and they would do their research, right? So this is part of the database building, right? Sometimes in any company, you're going to build a database from people that you're going to type them into whatever your CRM is. We use Salesforce at Capital One. And in some cases, you're going to have folks like me who are going to say, okay, Amit is joining us. He's going to cover California. let me go to a third-party tool and build a list of his chalk lines for companies that fit the strike zone for the state of California. So we've had a little bit of that. We had those databases already. So folks, as people came in new, as strategies change, as they find out new companies in their territory, they needed a third-party tool to go and do that research quickly, as opposed to going to Google and just type it in the name and searching a million places. So we first started with the EverString, which is basically the same, very similar firmographic focus as what ZoomInfo is now, or has been. And then the other piece that we had is I know Fern talked a lot about the different types of data we would get from a third party, from a B2B company, firmographic being one. But when our private companies, it's often hard to see who is actually active, right? There's a lot of information out there about private companies, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are like active looking for credit, right? A company that we might want to work with or try to work with. And so part of my job is simplifying or trying to narrow the focus and giving folks a good list of names to call on. We partnered with, at the time, EverString to build a list of, and again, if you're familiar with it, it's their UCC, their company filings when somebody has taken out a loan effectively from a company. So it shows activity in the market. And it could be folks that have borrowed money to get a copy machine for a smaller company, but also could be for a manufacturing company with warehouses. Maybe they need, they have forklifts or something of that nature. So these filings, which are public information, but they're state by state. So we partner at the time with EverString to build out a comprehensive list of these filings for the main states that our business that covers in this private company focus would provide us. This gets back to a couple of things, Fern, you said about big data, right? So data, we're talking about data that's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of rows, a lot of information, even at this narrow focus that we gave. So what EverString/Zoom now has done is they've taken these filings and then they've applied to them their firmographic data. So I've got Acme Company, I know it had a filing with Wells, and then ZoomInfo now comes in and says, well, Acme Company has this many employees, it has this revenue size, it has this industry, it's in this location. So it's a great balance of taking a filing at a state level that's pretty basic, and then layering in really what Zoom does a great job of is the firmographic information, those key points. That really helps us narrow. So now I can cut it by revenue size, and we put it into a dashboard to make it even easier. In the past, we get all this to be an Excel file. As you guys know, working with big data, it's very, very tricky to work with 150 people with Excel files that have everybody wants something different. So we put it into a database. Now they can filter themselves. We update it like every month. It's been a great partnership and a great example, and really saved a bunch of time, saved us cost. And really, at the end of the day, we're trying to get the right information to RMs when they need it. We're trying to meet them where they are. And this is a great example of partnership, building something that didn't exist. So we partnered with them to build it. So it helps them. Now they have a product that they can talk to other companies for. And it helps out our team. They don't have to go individually themselves to search up this state, this filing. We have this all. And so centralized teams like mine can really help the broader team be effective.
Interesting. Amit, do you have anything to add on the journey or questions?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Andy. So I think just to double click on some of the challenges that Andy was sharing, it is very common to what we got on the poll results. So if you look at traditionally, there were data providers that have focused on master data, and they have been there forever, that focus on master data for procurement, supply chain. They focus on master data for finance. But actually, there is no company that actually focuses on master data for revenue folks. And that's where, we also saw in the poll results, only 20%, less than 20% of the audiences who are here actually have a master data for revenue teams. And the second challenge, which again we saw in the poll results, is more than 70% of the folks here think that they have data accuracy issues. This is exactly what we found with the Capital One when they started. We found that with the traditional data vendors that at the time, the match rates, which is the ability to find information for companies that were smaller in size, was somewhere between 15 to 30%. Whereas when they started using EverString, ZoomInfo, the match rate actually went to 100%, close to 100%, with 70% as high confidence. And then the second part was the fill rate, the accuracy of the data, which is what Andy was talking about. Because again, salespeople, the relationship managers, for them, it is extremely important that they hit their quota. So therefore, they need to have the right information, complete information, not only for companies, but contacts also. So one of the greatest things that happened, which is again, building of a data analytics team, actually the data analytics team, I still remember it very vividly, where 2,700 data analytics folks evaluated ZoomInfo data for 1 year. And after that, they found that our data was at least 3 to 5 times better than what they were getting from some of these traditional data vendors for core firmographics, name, website if it exists, revenue, employee size, location, industry. So those were some of the important metrics that compelled, and that's where like I'm a big fan of Capital One, because large financial institutions, they betted on a small company at the time, EverString, where they were like, objectively, this is literally world's best data. And if you look at like ZoomInfo, the company today, for the last 2 decades, their journey is very synonymous to how Capital One thought about building the foundational data, where data analytics team is using all the data in the data warehouse, whereas relationship managers are using what we call sales operating system, ZoomInfo Sales OS, where they are doing the prospecting. So that journey, like where Andy and I have partnered, where I was one of the like co-founding member and chief operating officer at EverString, now part of ZoomInfo, where we have this breadth of data that has kind of helped Capital One to transform from soups to nuts, which is data analytics, backend, and then at the front end, the relationship managers.
Yeah, interesting. Andy, quick follow-up question. What data platform are you using for all of this big data that you talked about?
You mean to share it with the teams?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Capital One has Snowflake. We have a big data lake. Data comes through. So this is we've got a API coming in through an S3 bucket. That's what you're referring to, that we then export, and then we're leveraging a CRMA dashboard within Salesforce to share with the teams. If you guys know what CRMA is, it's like Tableau or a quick site, like on steroids, I say. I can drop it right in Salesforce. And then again, it's like, we're focused towards the whole thing of meeting somebody where they are. So we like this because I can take third-party data that doesn't have to be part of my Salesforce universe, and I can share that with people. So we've got it in our lake, but we also leverage it as a standalone CSV file to get really, really basic. But it does exactly what we need it to do. We build a dashboard, like I said, so people can access it anytime they want.
No, sounds good. Amit, I'm going to start with you on this one. What other use cases are companies using B2B data for? What are you seeing at ZoomInfo?
Yeah, thank you, Fern. So as we discussed about, one of the use cases was sales prospecting for Capital One, but the other use cases that we have seen for large financial institutions and other institutions is predictive modeling. So for any B2B predictive modeling, when you are trying to do net new customer acquisition, what we have found is that almost every company that's out there, they are at least using these core firmographics in their kind of predictive models. So think about, when I say core firmographics, in some combination of industry, NAICS, SIC, or employee size, revenue. So net new customer acquisition. And the reason this is very powerful with ZoomInfo, because we have 100% fill rates for those core attributes. So when you are trying to do like net new customer acquisition, by definition, you do not have transactional data for those customers. Therefore, what we see is that, unlike traditional data vendors where they charge you for per rows and per row of company and per column, ZoomInfo has an offering called Data Cubes, where we provide the entire company data to our customers, where they ingest all the data through data lakes, S3 bucket, or other systems, cloud data warehouse, where they kind of think about like positive examples of companies which are their segments, and the companies that they don't care about, they treat that as negative examples to build large-scale logistic regression models and things like that. So think about predictive modeling, cross-sell, upsell, churn prediction. Those are some of the common use cases. And one of the other things also which Capital One pioneered, or actually helped us to become better, and we have several patents on that, is identity resolution and customer 360. So ZoomInfo has a patented technology where our customers share with us like rows, business name and address, and we are able to apply a hashing algorithm where we are able to combine all the third-party data. So think about master data for revenue teams, uh, territory planning. So again, like a lot of sales-centric predictive modeling, segmentation, TAM analysis, total addressable market analysis. We are the only company that has a ICP, which is contact, like world's largest commercial data provider when it comes to B2B contact. So ideal customer profile. And then last but not the least, we also have a very rich data cubes. We call it intent data cubes, which is essentially our ability to figure out who is currently in the market that Andy just touched on. So it could be through UCC filing. We have more than 510,000 business taxonomy through which we are able to figure out who is currently in the market. So go-to-market competitive displacement. So essentially, we can provide insights in who is currently in the market and who is your competitor. So those are some of the common use cases where we are seeing when folks are using ZoomInfo data cubes, not just the prospecting tool, but the entire data in their data lake, they're able to build on top of it.
Oh, that's very interesting. It also sounds like a lot of what ZoomInfo has, I mean, some of what you're providing is also being provided via, that you're doing a lot of analytics on the back end to provide that data to customers. So that's very interesting. The intelligence that's in the ZoomInfo platform itself. Andy, how about you? Do you have any other use cases that may be happening at Capital One that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, and Amit touched on this. Transactional data is a big one for us, especially in our market where we can get our hands on it. But it is interesting, and it is true. We get some good data, but it gets expensive because they do charge you by the row and data point. But a lot of our businesses, who they're, in where I am in commercial banking, upmarket stuff, everybody is already banked by somebody. And so it's oftentimes, it's not that we're finding a lot of brand new names that don't have a bank. It's we're trying to get new names and trying to get into an existing bank group, right? That's usually how we work. We'll try to get in with a credit first and get into an existing bank group because a lot of these bank groups are big, right? 5 banks, 10 banks, 20 banks, et cetera. And so for us, the transactional nature and transactional information we get from some other providers, it complements what we do, and we've really gone all in with Zoom, but it complements the firmographic. So we start firmographic, basic information based on which we use, as you guys have both said, where's the company? How big is the company? What industry are they in, right? That drives some of our business specialty groups. And then we get into, okay, now I've got this, I get the contact information, which is all there in ZoomInfo, I know who it is, and now we can narrow it down by partnering that with some transactional data. The UCC, I just talked about specifically with Zoom and EverString than Zoom, and then we'll leverage other data points we might get from, I don't know, like Bloomberg, for example. Some other ones that are pretty common in the business that their job is transactions, right? Their sweet spot is not firmographic. It is this company has this loan, here's the pricing, here's the bank group, things of that nature. So that's the big one for us that partners with it. I can't really do one without the other. Right? If I find a good transaction, I still have to figure out the company size and attributes. So we use them both in conjunction. So for us, one of the first questions was, is it a multi-vendor strategy? 100%. Has to be, right? Has to be. For any one company to do all of these things, it would be really challenging. I think from my experience of seeing it, it's definitely possible, but it's a lot of data. So that's where we go to some other vendors that are very specialized. We have a private equity business, a smaller niche business. So there's a vendor that focuses on private equity world, right? So again, it depends on the business that you're in, what you're going after. But you always want to have a couple of things, 2, 3, 4 different vendors to really hit their business strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Amit, let me ask you this question. Well, we talked a little bit about bringing the data in, and in Andy's case, it was going to Snowflake, but how do organizations integrate B2B data with their current data? And are there certain platforms that work better than others? Do you see most of your clients doing this integration on a cloud platform, for instance? What are you seeing?
Another excellent question, Fern. So this is a very important distinction. So what we are seeing is like there are different kind of user units, if you will. So when you think about traditionally, master data has resided with CIO, Chief Information Officer, and an IT function. So there we see this master data being integrated directly with an IT function through MDM softwares. So Informaticas of the world, Reltios of the world, where they are consuming this foundational data through these softwares. So that's more like an IT function. What we are seeing where ZoomInfo excels is like we are focusing on revenue professionals like Andy, where it's master data for revenue outcomes. So for us, what we are seeing is that in addition to providing a form factor that is more conducive to seller, which is sales prospecting tool, a pretty good like interface, we are providing the data directly into these kind of cloud data warehouse. So think about Snowflake, Google BigQuery, Amazon S3. I'm especially big fan of Snowflake. The reason is because it's almost like you can write simple queries where you can literally join a lot of big party data, the third party data providers like ZoomInfo, and combine it with the first party data that you have. So bottom line is it enables you to have a complete view without having a lot of IT infrastructure, where you can utilize that data to do TAM analysis right away. So that's where we are seeing, like for revenue outcomes, Snowflake, Data Warehouse, Google BigQuery, Amazon S3 are more preferred approaches.
Interesting. And do you see a lot of your clients? I know, because I know ZoomInfo is on the Snowflake marketplace, right? I mean, are a lot of your clients going through the marketplace, or and trying to get the value out of that?
Yep. The biggest value proposition is that if you don't go through the marketplace, then you have to involve like IT and have like SFTP, S3, like some kind of SFTP mechanism set up that takes a lot of time. And whereas when you are on Snowflake, just on a click of a button, you are able to share all this data that ZoomInfo has and directly share in Snowflake. And that is what we have seen at Capital One. Again, pretty old relationship. Actually, they helped us to rebuild EverString. So that's where like a lot of those goodness we saw from old like Capital One days.
Interesting. Andy, how about you? You know, in terms of integration, you know, you mentioned Snowflake. Did you look at other types of platforms, and are you going through the marketplace?
Well, let me take it down a bunch of notches to the end user and talk about integration and talk about how we've integrated ZoomInfo into our Salesforce instance. And so what that allows, so the Snowflake and all that, that's great. But my main audience, my main customers are our end user RMs. They don't even know what Snowflake is in the wintertime, right? So they don't even understand what that is. So they just get database and reports, and where people like me will help try to, bring that down to something they can actually use. But what we've really done, which is we just turned this on a few months ago, is that we integrated ZoomInfo into our Salesforce. So it's our Salesforce database, right? The companies that our teams over time have built. So that's our first party data, of which a lot of times it was just a company name and address. That was it. We hadn't even started prospecting on it yet. And so again, you might go, so we want folks to use Salesforce to be more than just something you put your pipeline in, right? We want this to be the place they go to start their work for the day, their prospecting work. And so before this, we've had ZoomInfo for a long time. We've had the individual licenses. And so what that would mean is that I look up Capital One in Salesforce. I don't know anything about it. So then I have to go and, chair swivel over to my ZoomInfo link, and then I type in the name there and I do my research, and I go back to Salesforce and I type in some stuff there or fill out, missing fields. Now we put these two things together, like a nice recipe for a cocktail, let's say. Now the RM goes in, they go into Capital One, and then boom, they have this window, the magic window pane, the widget is right there, and they can see all that ZoomInfo experience right there in within their window. They can push buttons and create contacts. They could even push buttons and create missing data. They can also search separately within ZoomInfo, not in a particular company, and create right within Salesforce, create a new company if it was missing, if it didn't already exist. So it may not seem like a lot, but I'm telling you, the feedback has been overwhelmingly like, this is great. Where has this been? Why did it take so long? Because we're just, when you're dealing with any sales organization and you're in a support role like I am, being able to take away steps of any time, any magnitude is huge, right? Is huge. We have already had years of experience building up that and getting that feedback. That ZoomInfo is a trusted, well-respected provider. The data is accurate. The data is just, it's what the teams need. And now we put all these things together. They have to go into Salesforce every day to do their jobs, to move deals along, to push things through. They didn't have to go to ZoomInfo, but they needed to. So now we brought the need into where they have to be, and the integration allows like one-click creation of things. We've taken away some data entry, which everybody's tired of data entry, right? We've made it, data accuracy, always a challenge. It doesn't fix things outright, but it shows you, hey, this contact may have moved, right? It helps you figure out where you may have duplicate information or bad information. And it's another source to help us get our data better organized. So I've saved time, I've driven efficiency, and I'm also, chipping away at our broader data challenges that we definitely have.
Yeah, and the people are happy because they don't have
People are
to
happy.
learn another system. Yeah, it's sort of right there. I've seen that happening in other areas, not just in like sort of CRM, but ERP and, where you're bringing it all to that system because the business users are used to doing that. Now, I want to make sure that we leave time for audience Q&A. So the last question I have is, what are the key best practices for getting started with utilizing third-party firmographic data? And Amit, I'll start with you on this one. So what other best practices do you want to make sure that our audience knows about?
Yep. So, I think this again ties back to some of the trends that we are seeing. So the conventional wisdom that says that for a multi-vendor data strategy to work, you do some kind of data triangulation, meaning, let's say you are trying to figure out the revenue of a company or employee size. You buy the same data from multiple data vendors, and if 2 or more agrees out of 3, that means it's more reliable data and good data. That's the conventional wisdom. What we found is that literally for hundreds of years, this market had been monopolized by some of these big behemoth like data providers, where they were kind of very good on the credit and risk side of the world, but not necessarily on the revenue side. So when it comes to mastering the data for revenue teams, what we are seeing consistently, and this is a trend that I'm seeing also, is that there is a group of very sound, very seasoned, IT professionals, and think about master data, CIOs, chief data officer, where they are collaborating with the businesses, and they are coming up with the foundational data provider. So instead of saying that, hey, I'm going to have a group consensus, what we found was that same data provider is actually selling data to other data providers. So now you thought that you were getting triangulation, but actually same data was getting into all of these data providers. So the smart ones, what they are thinking about is that, hey, I'm going to have an objective measure and source of truth for each of these elements. Like source, rather than triangulation, source of truth for each of the attributes. And then I'm going to fill in the gaps with other data vendors. So that's like one of the things where Henry Schuck, who is our CEO founder, his vision was essentially he has done acquisitions of more than 10 companies on the data layer itself, and they were all experts in B2B data, so that now you have a foundational data for firmographics, technographics, intent, IP, or UCC data Andy mentioned, contact data, direct dial, phone numbers, LinkedIn, social information. So like the foundational data, and then the gaps that are out there, now you start filling in rather than doing triangulation and trying to match and merge these multiple sources. That's pretty hard. So I would say that's one of the ways where I'm seeing the right way to utilize a third-party firmographic data provider.
Great. Andy, how about you? Any other best practices for getting started?
from my end, as somebody that would go to a MIT and has gone, I think for folks like me out there, you got to be specific, right? Let me get one example. When I was in my last company where we were starting an energy coverage vertical, and we just went to a vendor and said, hey, give me all the energy companies. And we had 3 people, and we ended up with like 25,000 companies. And guess what? They were overwhelmed, right? They didn't know we weren't specific with what we wanted, right? We didn't go to the vendor at the time and say, hey, we want this company with these attributes, these firmographic attributes, and therefore we boiled the ocean. And so the examples that we have, we talked about the UCC data, we were super specific. We want these 9 states, these attributes, these filings. It again, because when I talk to my sales team, it's not, hey, show me everything you can, and it's, hey, I want to see all companies in these 4 counties with, revenue of this specific size. So be as specific as possible. And as you're evaluating companies, right, that's the kind of questions you want to ask of them. See, like how they would address those, what kind of information they have to get to those levels of specificity.
Great. Thank you both so much. I see we have some audience questions. So what I'm going to do is hand it back over to Jim to address those. So Jim, over to you.
Thanks. Let's get started with this question. I'll open up to the floor. Would firmographics data for government entities or infrastructure funding be included in traditional B2B data, or would it be viewed as a separate category?
I will take that. So if you think about information for a particular sector, in this case, like government, the definition of an entity, which is government agency, that would be considered as a traditional B2B data. However, if there are niche data attributes inside the government, that's where you will have to go for like other data providers. So like again, like if you think about the US government, and there are like multiple, what we would consider from sales and marketing perspective, different buying units, that would be considered more like a B2B data, traditional B2B data. But if you are trying to get beyond that, something very specific on supply chain and things like that, that's where it will be considered more like a niche.
Yeah, let me jump in too in that one. Specifically, we have a tiny little vertical called aerospace, defense, and government. And a lot of the companies that live in that space have a high-level NAICS industry of professional services, right? A portion of their business is in government contracts or defense contracts, right? So it's been challenging to provide them a list just based off typical firmographic, narrowing that we would do. And so that's where there's companies out there that focus directly on like the contracts. There's a list of government contracts as one example that we would direct them to in that case. Firms like ZoomInfo and MIT, sometimes they'll bring in these niche things. Like there's another company, we have a not-for-profit as another example, and there's a company out there called GuideStar that just does not-for-profit reporting. I mentioned for us, we have a private equity business. There's a company called PitchBook that focuses narrowly in that space. So I think it's hard for anyone, even as good and as large as Zoom is, to do all things. So you're better off finding those niche providers. I guess they'd still be considered B2B type companies, but that can really narrow in on that. And that gets back to what I was saying, right? If you went to Zoom because you wanted to get 100% buttoned up on defense companies, that's probably not good. You're going to want to find somebody else to partner with in data side, because it's just, it's just so specific. And if there's somebody that does that, that all they do is that, it'll give you a better answer.
All right, thanks. Ahmed, I'm going to direct this one to you. What are some other challenges that companies face when using third-party data, and how can they overcome them?
Great question, Jim. I think one of the most common challenges that we see is that historically, if you think about ZoomInfo as a company, we have been known as a contact data provider. And so what happens is that traditionally, the way companies think about is that they will buy company data firmographics from some other data provider, then they'll try to join it with the contact data that ZoomInfo provides. And when they try to do that, there's a significant drop off in terms of accuracy, because it's very hard to so I think that's one of the things where ZoomInfo has been able to solve it by providing that foundational data where now you have the firmographics, technographics, all the data that is more foundational to B2B, and then you can join the contact data. So the challenge is when you try to join these disparate systems, there is a significant drop off or loss when you're trying to merge the data. Whereas when you use one foundational data and then fill in the gaps, you see a pretty big lift.
All right. Staying with you, Amit, what are the most common types of B2B data that companies use as they're getting started with it?
Yep, sure. So everybody knows this, like Andy has already mentioned, when you are starting, it starts with core firmographics so that you can do total addressable market analysis. When you mature as a company, then you start bringing in some other data attributes like technographics, like intent, like IP, so that you start like combining that together so that you can have fit, intent, recency, engagement. So you start with like core firmographics, then you go with contact data. So now you have your TAM analysis, you know your ICP. Once you have those two pieces of information, then you mature on your journey.
Yeah. I just add, like you guys have scoring data, for example, and I know we haven't really started with that yet. Maybe I think we're kind of down the mature path. We score with our internal stuff, like our win rates, like where we're good with industries, for example, and we partner that in. And I know we can bring that back and really build out those models with what you guys offer. But definitely, just from the other end of the spectrum, completely agree. You got to start with the basic stuff, and then from there, when you figure out what you're looking at, what the teams have, where you're good, and now you can narrow it down and get a little more specific, as Amit just mentioned.
Here's a sort of a management style question, and I'll open this to Amit and Andy. How can I ensure that data enrichment efforts continue and don't end once a project finishes?
Yeah, I'll start that one, Amit, if you don't mind, because we battle this in my role all the time, right? All the time. Hey, our contacts stink. We got to go clean them up. So you spend a few weeks cleaning up contacts, you get through a portion of them, and then you're on to the next thing, right? So how do you make sure any data, you stay on it? You keep it in front of people with reporting. You build reporting that matters into KPIs. As an example, on contacts for us, we are trying to push not contact cleanup, but hey, I'm going to use your contact data for marketing efforts, and I'm not going to ask you to fill out a spreadsheet every single time. I'm just going to use what's in the system, right? Which is a benefit to folks. But so you're sort of, carrot or the stick. You're kind of giving them a big carrot without telling them the data stinks. Hey, if you want to use this, we're going to continue to do this. This is our push. It will, it's not quick, but you will get people to care about their data. When we've ever tried to do a cleanup effort for a couple weeks or a day or a month, you're right, Jim. They just end, and then they're on to them, and everybody forgets about them. When you try to incorporate the data and the facets of data that are important into the BAU part of the jobs, then we're getting much more buy-in. People care, and we've just seen it. It just gets the data better. It takes time. This is not a short-term project. This is like just the way the business. This is a strategy decision, but that's kind of what we found and where we're headed.
Yeah. So Jim, just to add to that, so I was a software engineer, and back in days, waterfall methodology was very common, where you start a project, it's a multi-year project, and you will go work in stages. These days in the engineering, like almost every organization uses agile methodology. Similarly, on the revenue side, what you'll find is that mastering the data was more of an IT function for finance. And what you will see is, look at the number of titles and trends that you are seeing. Most of the organizations are relying more and more on sales ops, marketing ops, revenue ops, because it's more like an agile function where they are kind of dedicated for revenue outcomes. And so from trend perspective and from management perspective, what you see is that ZoomInfo acquired recently a company called Ringlead, which helps in data orchestration. And the whole purpose of Ringlead was, how can I keep your sales force, like CRM, and marketing automation systems up to date with all of this data automatically as people are changing their jobs, revenue of companies are changing, who is currently in the market, things like that. And so, companies like fast-growing companies in today's environment, I would say efficient companies, what you will find is that they have a lot of automation and they're using these lightweight tools rather than these heavyweight MDM tools to keep the solution up to date. So it's almost like a centralized data strategy for decentralized buying units. That's a common pattern that we are seeing rather than one size fit all kind of approach.
You've talked a lot about all sorts of B2B data. What is the top trend in the field of B2B data, and how can our audience stay on top of what's changing?
Again, a great question. So one of the things that Andy and team are on the commercial side, like more upmarket side of the business, one of the top trends is you must have heard about intent data and then IP to domain, like who is currently in the market and what they're looking right now. So that's one of the common trend. And then the second trend, as I already mentioned, is that, again, like operationalization, not rather the data element itself, but essentially more around how to keep my data up to date, the data that we have. So that's where like emergence of rev ops, marketing ops, sales ops, as more of a master data team rather than like more back-end team, like more aligned with the revenue outcomes. I think that's the type of trend that we are seeing. And the data attributes, as I said, is in addition to firmographics, now you are talking about other things like technographics, who is my competitor, UCC filing, who is currently in the market, the intent data, who is currently looking for my products, IP to domain, which is who visited my website. That's like a very valuable first-party data. How do I translate it into a company? Those are some of the trends that we are seeing.
Yeah, I would just echo in on the how to say this, combining the data. Oh, my Alexa's talking to me. Combining the data with our own data. So combining third-party data with first-party data and figuring out the insights there. And one of the pieces part of the bank is doing just that. They're taking ZoomInfo as one of the providers with their mass data brick process there, and combining to that some of the card for data we have internally to build out a master prospecting sort of file, or because we realize we don't have every company, obviously. ZoomInfo has most all of the other ones that we don't have, they're out there. So we're trying to build this broader universe of what's there to get a better sense of coverage, right? How we're doing, where we're spending time. But no third party is going to have the level of data that you're going to have in your own company, right? That's the job of your sales team, right? To find out information about these companies. So combining those pieces together gives you a really powerful tool that then leads to intent, to triggers, right? What's next? Where should that kind of a thing. So that's what we're seeing a lot more of internally. And again, a simpler scale when we just integrated ZoomInfo to our Salesforce. That's a very easy model. On the data side, the other parts of the bank are doing bigger things with it, building algorithms off it, trying to forecast, attrition or who's next, that kind of a thing. So that's where it gets really powerful when you combine those two.
Well, speaking of all that data, do either of you have any advice on data integration? Consolidating data from multiple sources into a single location can be time-consuming and a challenging process. Any best practices to share?
So again, when you take a master data approach, it is going to be a very time-consuming and complex process. What we are seeing is a crawl, walk, run approach where you, especially again on the revenue side, when you think about, that's why I talked about something like Snowflake or a data lake which is more acting as a centralized data repository. And then once you have the foundational data, because you have already the transactional data, not everything, but you spend time in figuring out the important attributes that you think is going to be beneficial for your downstream beneficiaries. And then the integration becomes relatively easier. And then now you start like pushing those integrations nightly, weekly, monthly, depending upon the data cadence into your system of records, like your CRM marketing automation system. And then last but not the least, you can always have RESTful APIs and webhooks to keep your data up to date and call on demand. So again, I touched on a lot of things, but again, at the center is something like a data lake. And then for not everything, but you have to identify your constituents, like who is going to be the end consumer of your data. And then you start plugging in all these different attributes.
I would also note that we've, on a broader scale, TDWI has written a lot about, just data integration and unified platforms and all of that. If the question is wider than that, and you just go to the TDWI website under research and resources, go under best practices reports, and there was one on unified data platforms that was done in the past year as an example. And we have unified data warehouses and data lake houses. We talk about data integration, and there's other sources. So, I mean, just from a much broader perspective.
Amit, finally, what's next for Capital One and ZoomInfo?
I will let Andy start with that, and then I will chime in.
So what's next? Like I said, for us, very simply, we've integrated in the last few months. We're going to make sure this is getting leveraged, and we're getting to those bells and whistles that ZoomInfo offers. Like I said, as Mitt talked about, there's a level of maturity. Whenever you are dealing with or working with folks like a sales organization, you got to get them comfortable with what the data is, what's there, how do you use it, and we have to try to figure out then how to leverage the best parts of it and to turn on those new enhancements that they didn't already know about. So we're going to do there, and we're also going to revisit with the team. We built out this model. We talked about this UCC file a few years ago. We're going to revisit that and enhance it a little bit. There's a few things we found we want to try to add and tweak, and we're going to partner with the team to sort of make some of those enhancements, some feedback we've gotten. And the last thing I'll say, and again, nobody asked me this, but ZoomInfo has been a great partner because of folks like Amit and the team over there who are so responsive, and it truly is a partnership, right? I don't think that my job, my role could be successful without finding partners like ZoomInfo and working with them. It is a part of the business. I think anybody in my role should have those vendors, those third-party partners that just bring in information that we don't have internally, right? And we're not going to build out our own teams all the time to do that. So you have to find those partners and keep that up, right? Yes, we pay them, but like we learn from them. I think they learn a little bit from us. It helps them. It helps us. It's a mutually beneficial thing. So that's been a great thing. So that's some of the stuff. That's what's next tactically, and it is a little more, my feelings of the team going forward.
Thank you, Andy. So I think in terms of journey, we have like the basics, like as we said, we started with the sales prospecting tool. We now have the master data that is powering the Capital One from third-party perspective, the core firmographics. I think now we need to get onto the contact cubes. We have something called contact where we want to provide them all the contacts that they care about. Once that is checked off, then we want them to mature to like our intent cubes where who is currently in the market. We would like to get that rolled out. Once that's out there, we would like to have an automated system where we have something called IP cubes. So other financial institutions who are further away in certain areas, who are ZoomInfo customers, they are using our IP cubes where first-party data like IP to domain mapping is something that we are doing. So there's a lot of other elements that we would like Capital One to get to that phase.
Well, we've come to the end of our time, so let me take a moment to thank our speakers today. We've heard from Fern Halper with TDWI, Amit Rai with ZoomInfo, and Andy Ruffles with Capital One. Again, I'd also like to thank ZoomInfo for sponsoring today's webinar. We have recorded today's webinar, and we'll be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation, so feel free to share that with colleagues. And if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, please locate the resource window. Finally, you can learn more about this topic and a lot more at TDWI Nashville. That's May 14th to the 19th. You can attend full or half-day courses with vetted instructors, ask questions, meet colleagues, and earn certificates or CPE credits. You can visit tdwi.org/Nashville to learn more and view the agenda. From all of us here today, let me say thank you very much for attending. This concludes today's event.